I'm with Dr. Felix. Dr. Felix.
That is
so, medical doctor?
Yep, trained at the Royal London Hospital, so not far from
Which
here.
is just down the road with a helicopter on the roof. Yeah?
Exactly.
We've actually been on the roof with that helicopter. It's a stunning sight, I must tell you. So, I mean, it's a big decision to go into medicine and probably a bigger decision to come out of medicine. What happened?
Well, I like to think I didn't come out of it, but for me to go into it, it was I never really considered it. I was the fourth generation Jackson trained at the London Hospital, so I just kind of did that because that's what you do as a family. And in fact, I discovered after I qualified that my father was quite keen that I didn't do it. He was hoping I'd go somewhere else and get a proper job, which always made me laugh.
If I could just say, any doctors listening now will be having their own heart attack.
Exactly.
Or a proper job.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I really enjoyed working in anaesthetics. I really enjoyed that working in Plymouth. But ultimately, I kind of accidentally left. I got a couple of jobs outside working for DocsNet UK and doing some digital things. And I just really got passionate about that. And a few years on, I just looked back and thought, well, actually, I've been out for about 5 years now. Am I really going to go back to clinical practice?
Yeah.
But I can't do what I'm doing now without being a doctor. You know, I'm using those skills, the things I learned in medical school, the fact I've treated patients, you know, resuscitated people, you know, all that learning and knowledge is fundamental to what I'm doing now.
Do you regard yourself now as a bobble hat? Are you a technologist?
It's a great question. Yeah, I'm proud to be a geek,
Yeah.
but I'm kind of half. So I recognise I'm not working clinically, so I'm not a full clinical practice kind of doctor. So I need to work with people who are clinical, but I understand technology and how it can be applied, and a lot more than most people about how things work.
I think I get that interface. It's really very important. And you run your own company now. Tell us about your company.
So we're 14 people employed, and we've got about 6 contracts to work with. So we're just under 20 people on any normal day. It's going extremely well, but it's been hard work. I mean, digital health as a concept has really come to the front in the last couple of years. Before that, people were like, you know, they couldn't really understand how to apply technologies like Instagram and Facebook to healthcare. But now people are really beginning to see that.
They're looking for the channel, aren't they, to make that connection. It's almost as though we annex our real life when we come to work, and we step back into the 1960s, you know, with flared trousers and full cortinas when we come back in the 80s. How are you funded? Have you got venture caps?
Well, it's a great question, because I went for funding, and I've gone for funding a couple of times, and we came very close on occasion, but ultimately we've just managed to do it ourselves. And I like that, because we're in control of our own decisions. We're not beholden to anybody else. We can do the right thing because we want to, and that's really nice.
And you have massive skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we totally control it. We own it, between me and Paul, my business partner. So he's the technologist. He builds all the stuff.
Yeah.
And I've got a number of friends who've got companies which have got backing from venture capitalists, and they struggle because sometimes they're forced to do things they don't agree with, and maybe not necessarily the right thing. A long-term view has to be put aside for a short-term profit, and I don't want to do that.
I want to get on to what you actually do in a minute, because it's really very interesting. But you said something that I want to pick up on. You talked about now there's a wider interest in the technologies outside the NHS and to bring them in the NHS. And, you know, we're seeing things like Babylon, which is a real game changer in primary care. There are GoDoc and there are lots of others. Do you think that we are in danger of creating a sort of electronic Tower of Babel, where we've gone from one sort of paper and fax machine confusion now into an electronic confusion? And there's like, I mean, I couldn't even begin to list the number of apps and stuff that come across my desk with people who want to promote technology in the NHS.
Absolutely. I think technology isn't the solution. It's an enabler. It helps you get better solutions. But patient care is what's needed, and better patient care, more efficient patient care. But if you focus on the technology, you can get lost. You can end up delivering technologies that just aren't effective or useful. And it's really important to use them as a tool.
You and I met at the launch of a paper at the House of Commons, which I really produced. I thought it was just like a wish list of nonsense. But what I thought was interesting, one of the themes in that document, I think, was the government's role in shepherding or corralling or giving a direction to what we want our digital future to be. The NHS, everybody's got a digital strategy, but no one's got a strategy that works. The whole thing is extremely confusing. I mean, do you think that it's time for government to take a a role in this, or would that be the sort of dead hand of the government?
I absolutely think it's critical, which is why I support the paper.
Yeah.
And I don't mind a wish list of ideas, because it's really nice to see somebody thinking about it and putting it out there. Within that paper, I think there's some great ideas.
Yeah. And I tell you, one of them I thought was the annual report to Parliament. I mean, any annual report is a waste of time, because by the time they've reported it's out of date. But I thought perhaps the discipline of that might be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And the overall idea of doing more digital, I think that's clearly the next step. You know, the digital revolution has happened, and it's revolutionised the travel industry, the music industry, many industries. Retail industries being hit by it now, with House of Fraser closing, today. You've got these massive impacts on the way we're living our lives, and that's happening now in healthcare as well.
Yeah.
And getting behind that with the NHS, thinking about that is really important. But they have to focus on using the technology to get better results. And you talked about a digital strategy. I think what they need is a strategy that incorporates these new technologies. And sometimes people focus on digital as the answer, but it's actually part of.
Yeah, it's about what we want it to do. And to be honest, I mean, we still don't have ubiquitous Wi-Fi across the whole landscape of healthcare. I mean, it's just, I mean, they say, well, it's coming, it'll be there by Christmas. They don't tell you which Christmas, but, I mean, how can we not have Wi-Fi? Coffee shops have Wi-Fi. It just drives me by. Anyway, let's talk about your app. Now, can I use the word WhatsApp without getting a punch in the teeth for saying it? Can we start with WhatsApp? Because there'll be a lot of people who won't be familiar with what you're doing. So can we use that as a jumping off point?
Absolutely, because that is the problem. The problem is that doctors and nurses and other health and care workers are using WhatsApp and other non-compliant technologies like iMessage and SMS even, and lots of things to share confidential patient information every single day. And that is against the NHS regulations, and it's also often against UK data protection law. So people are breaking the law.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because if we just sort of break off from that train of thought for a moment, in primary care, okay, we know primary care is under pressure, they don't kind of have GPs and blah, 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 no one can get an appointment. So what happens? Babylon come along, Alipasa comes along with an app that says, well, you can't make an appointment with your GP, you can do it on your phone. And people say, yeah, and like, I think it's 100,000 people now have signed up for Babylon. So people will migrate, people will rat run, they will walk over the corner of the grass and wear a path. They will find their own way. And WhatsApp was a classic example of doctors needing a communication conduit. There was one there, so they used it and said, what the hell?
Absolutely. So I don't blame the health and care workers at all. And they're usually very good at anonymising patients, keeping that confidential data confidential. But obviously mistakes happen, or sometimes a combination of data makes it.
Well, there's a potential for it, isn't there? I don't think anything desperately bad did happen, although some doctors got in trouble for texting, I think.
Well, no, I mean, some people have been disciplined. A report came out recently showing that a number of, a number of health and care workers have actually been disciplined for sharing confidential information.
I suppose the government could have done a deal with WhatsApp.
They could do, but it's fundamentally not compliant, and the way it works is never really going to be compliant.
Right, so let's move on to what your exciting product is.
Yeah, so we've created MedCrowd, which it's a bit like WhatsApp. It works slightly differently.
MedCrowd. One
exactly.
word. You've got a website.
Yeah, exactly.
www.medcrowd.com.
Yeah,
okay,
it took us out to look at that one.
We'll all look it up. Yeah, that's a lot of originality gone into that. Yeah, go on.
And basically, it's trying to give an alternative for people to use in place of WhatsApp and other.
Yeah. So it fundamentally works like WhatsApp. So you can create a group.
Yeah.
And you can have conversations in that group and not worry about leakage or the Data Protection Act or the GDPR as it is now.
So yes, the first thing is it's compliance. So things like there's a complex password that you've got to log in every time, which means a bit like your banking app.
Yeah. And you can bring your own thing to work, and it works on your Apple phone or your Samsung or whatever.
Exactly, and somebody centrally could remove you from that team, as we call it, rather than the group, and then you wouldn't have access to that information. The next time you log in, you wouldn't be able to access that information.
Okay, fine.
So let's say,
Well, that works on the care pathway, because people would need to be in and out, wouldn't they?
Exactly, and so you can invite people. And we've got one fundamental difference from WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, you have a group where you send messages to it, and you get this long stream talking about different patients and different topics. Whereas what we do is we have a conversation. You can give that an ID number, like an NHS ID number, and then that conversation can be about a specific patient.
Yes.
And then you can invite people in.
And that's the thing I thought was clever, because the patient can be part of that conversation.
Exactly, and we're working with a couple of people who are looking at that as a possibility. And you might have a few conversations about a patient, one with the orthopaedic surgeon, one with the patient and the care coordinator
Yeah.
at the GP. So you can imagine there might be some conversations. But of course they can then be picked up and synced with the records.
Well, not only that, I mean, there's things like pain control, isn't there? You know, what your pain levels are today, and you know, I mean, we were talking earlier about comorbidity. I mean, how few people actually go into hospital now with one thing wrong with them. So you know, it's the diabetologist will be interested in Mrs. Brown getting a new hip because of her stability post-operative and all that.
Yeah, so you could have a conversation, you know, about that stay.
I think there's a lot of legs in this. I think it's a great idea. So where is it up and running? Are we still in the spit and whistle stage, or can we plug it in and make it work?
Yeah, so it's a bit further than that, but it's not finished yet, or whatever finished means.
But it never will be. Right? No
Well,
technology
exactly.
ever is.
Yeah. So we launched last March with the online version, which is very good and is working very nicely. We're using that in a number of different places. And then the apps came out in September. We've had to rework them a bit based on feedback. We're still trying to catch up a bit, so they're not perfect yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
And we've had some really good feedback about the concept, about the direction we're taking, but there's definitely some bugs which are trying to get fixed. But we've got at least 3 pilots kicking off imminently. We've got a project in Zambia where the Department of Health in Zambia have approved MedCrowd as a use alongside some clinics that are being built, 108 clinics and 3 new hospitals being built by NMC.
Now that's clever, isn't it? Because you know we all know that there's a number of doctors per 1,000 beds, and nurses actually is a lot lower in these developing countries.
Absolutely.
So to have that connectivity for what it's like sort of telemedicine, isn't it? Second version, son of telemedicine.
Well, exactly. I mean, it is telemedicine.
Yeah.
It's just using messaging apps rather than kind of video calling.
You've been there and done it yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, so I had an amazing year out of medical school where I travelled and worked in China and South Africa. And I spent some time in Mossvold Hospital, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. It's a very remote hospital. It's 3.5 hours drive from Durban, which is their kind of referral centre. And the doctors were there very isolated, run by 6 GPs at the time. A number of different isolated clinics around with 2 or 3 nurses running a satellite kind of clinic. And so
it's very brave, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. And these very talented staff who are literally out on their own. And they were trying to introduce technology at the time, and of course that meant putting copper cables down with the internet in it. But of course the cables kept on being destroyed, ripped up, run over, and they'd lose the internet and they'd lose their telemedicine connection through to Durban. But of course now with the mobile technologies, these towers are going in, and mobile technology is being adopted has been adopted much faster.
Yeah. So you've seen it. And China's interesting as well. I mean, I know a lot of people have been to China. The Chinese government are putting a lot of money into their healthcare. I know that. Peter Carter, who used to be the boss of the Royal College of Nursing, he's been out there several times, and he comes back with really interesting stories. And they're trying to make primary care the principal source of their investment, I think.
Yeah, and I mean the Chinese are incredible and amazing at doing stuff. If they put their mind into doing something, they can do it really well on a massive scale, which is quite impressive.
Well, they
to
can
see.
make things happen.
Exactly.
And that comes back to the point we were discussing earlier, the extent to which the government can make it happen. I was talking to Dido Harding, who is the chair of NHS Improvement, and she's on the board of Sainsbury's. And I said to her, if Sainsbury's wanted to do some IT thing, how would you do it? And she said, well, we do a national procurement. The boxes will be delivered on Monday, it will be installed on Tuesday, and it will be up and running on Wednesday. But because in the NHS, we've left the installation of Wi-Fi to 212 CCGs who have got lots of other things to do and no money.
Absolutely, and it's really difficult to do things at scale in NHS because you're dealing with thousands of different organisations who all have to sign it off and agree, and many of them don't feel their populations are fundamentally different and want to do things.
Do you think it's time for government to take a stronger role in the direction of?
Well, yes, big question.
Yeah.
I kind of feel it interesting that it's time for people to be able to get their own healthcare directly. Like the real world works. You can shop at Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Aldi, Lidl, and we all shop at various shops to get different things. And that's the same as I think healthcare needs to go, because the NHS is never going to be able to innovate in the same way as the real world can.
But of course, if you live in Bassett Law up north, and Bassett Law is the only hospital, you don't have a lot of choice, do you? I mean, in London, as you say, you were trained in London. We've got Guy's, Thomas's, Bartholomew's. We've got a plethora of places to choose. But the other thing is, do we really choose? I mean, if I'm ill and there's some treatment options, I'm going to say to a clever person like you, well, what would you do, doctor?
Yeah, I think people will choose. I mean, you can imagine if you need to do a blood test and you're, in a fairly remote location where you have to go to the local hospital and drive 45 minutes to get there, you could easily get the kit delivered, and it might be a skin prick blood test that you could just package up in a box.
Oh,
and
that's
send back.
technology, isn't it?
Exactly, and that could be done by a number of different providers, and it doesn't. You may not even know who they are. Your GP just orders the blood test, and it arrives through the post. You do a finger prick test and send it back
That's
with
the
nice
lab.
clear instructions. And that's the kind of thing which I can see coming in.
On the supply side.
Exactly, and you say you can't choose, but that lab could be based in London or somewhere else and be sending out boxes in the post. And so you can, and consultations
Well,
like
testing,
Babylon,
I suppose, really screening, bowel screening.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff it's advice. It doesn't have to be done in
Yeah.
person. It doesn't have to be done in GP surgery or in hospital.
It's a whole new avenue for us to explore. And what's your business model? Are you licensed, selling the license, or have you worked it out yet? How does it work?
So it's free to use for everybody, like a WhatsApp style messaging app, and any health and care worker, any patient can log in and do that, any resident of a care home. And then on top we're charging a premium subscription for advanced features. So one of which is, for example, integrating with Care Record. So if a hospital wanted to see those conversations actually in that patient's care record, or a GP practice wanted to do that, we would then charge those practices, those institutions. So it's free to the health and care workers, and then we're hoping in time we'll get subscriptions as people see that value.
Okay, let's think. 5 years from now, 3 years from now, how do you see?
So I believe that MedCrowd will be used as the messaging app for your healthcare information, or health and care information, because people want it separate from WhatsApp. They don't want to have all their conversations mixed in about their private, if they've got HIV or diabetes, they want to have that separate. And the advantage around conversations, and those conversations appearing in care records where GPs looking at EMIS, or an EMIS on their computer, and they can see those conversations. Those advantages means it's the right thing for proper confidential data, and I hope that it'll be used globally by health and care workers and their patients all around the world. And we've already got that beginning to happen now.
Well, every once in a while in my travels around the NHS, I meet a game changer. I think we've met one this morning. Thank you really very much for your time. We wish you luck with it, and who knows, we might all be part of the MedCrowd in the next 5 years. Dr. Felix, thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks very much.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye now.